Do you know how powerful you are?
Welcome to Rise Urban Nation.
Welcome everybody to Rise Urban Nation.
Reshaping and elevating your mindset to help you achieve what you believe.
Sometimes we don't even see our own greatness. You can't be what you can't see.
And connecting Black cultures to build a community of talent and success.
Black people need to realize that they are assets. You are an asset.
When we rise, you rise.
Come together as a group.
This is Rise Urban Nation with Terrell Simmons.
That's your microphone check 1 2 1 2. What is this? This is your host, Terrell Simmons, in the place to be. Welcome to another episode of Rise Urban Nation. Yay, I got it right. You know, when you have to go through a sudden name change, it takes you a while to get really configured with it. This episode, I'm proud to bring to you Solo. What can I say? He going from a football defensive lineman into the world of tech is not always an easy transition, but somehow he makes it seem like it was flawless. He is the chief operating officer and co-founder of Calaxy, and it's an open social marketplace for creators by creators that aims to reimagine the entertainment industry and the fundamental ways which we interact digitally. And I'm excited to see what he does with this new tech product, and I'm hoping that you can go on the journey with me to learn more about it, learn about his career journey and entrepreneurship journey, and then just vibe out with us as we have a really nice fluid conversation. Without further ado, Solo. So were you? I know Sasha's from the LA area. You born and raised in the LA area too?
No, I'm actually from St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. Correct. Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, the Midwest, and moved out east to Philly, where I went to Penn, played football there. Then moved to New York, did the whole Wall Street thing 5 years or so before moving to LA about a month and a half ago. Nice. So definitely excited to be on the best coast over here.
Yeah, you and I, West Side, you know, it's the best side. Like I'm from the East, so like, you know, it didn't take me too much time to transition. The weather was just so nice. I just said, you know what, I'm done.
I'm out.
I know St. Louis got that little East Coast weather too.
Yeah, St. Louis it'd be humid, it'd be hot as hell in the summer, but then it'd be cold in the winters too. But definitely excited to be out here.
Awesome. Well, Sasha, as you see, I hit the record button. I didn't forget this time. And we'll jump into the interview. So, just to give you a little background on this podcast, and I'm excited to really talk to you because I fell into the tech industry. Like I was helping out this little company called Google and Techstars with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the start place. They're like, Terrell, you know, we have these startup weekends, but all we get is a bunch of white and Asian people. Could you help us like kind of reach to the Black and brown community? And that's how I really got into the entrepreneurship tech space. But I'll read about your story, and I can't wait to hear about your journey as we go. And I really wanted to create this platform so that more people can, especially our Black and brown people, see more people like you doing stuff in this space. Because after I got into it, I started seeing more people that were just doing amazing things. I was like, man, there's people like Solo building blockchain and all this stuff. Like, I didn't even know we was in here doing this.
Wow. Love it.
So I love it. And then hopefully we can be a resource, not only just here, but all across the diaspora, enjoying resources, powers, and strategize and all that good stuff. So before we jump into your amazing career, let's start here. I always like to do an introduction by asking, you know, it could be a deep question, but I'm gonna let you take it wherever you want to take it to. Who is Solo?
Oh, interesting. Great question. Who is Solo? Okay, so Solo is a 26-year-old newly found tech founder. Had a previous life in financial services. West African descent. My mom is from Senegal. My dad is from Gambia. Hey. So already growing up from that perspective, you have to learn how to kind of hustle your way around, right? Like you're going to have to learn how to live in two distinctly different worlds, right? Like, so I think with that gave me a lot of the skills that I had to kind of do what it is I do now, right? Like I sit in the world between, blockchain and this super cryptic, hard to understand ecosystem. In pop culture and entertainers, right? And like influencers and some of the most, notable, most, kind of visually, present people and part of society, right? Like, so I sit at these two very different ecosystems as well. And I think just overall, I've been good at being a connector in my life, right? Like I've been able to connect, things, make sense of things that are a bit tough to understand and really dissect and analyze things. And so I think because of that, from my upbringing, from my cultural background and all of these things, I think that's like made me the man I am today and kind of gave me the skills to be able to do what it is that I do. So I think that's kind of the short answer.
Well, I love it. I love it. So now, are you first generation or is your parents first generation?
I'm first generation.
Nice. So that's what gets very interesting because I know for me, my stepdad is Nigerian and he came over, taxi driver, school was a big thing. Was school a big important thing for your parents too? Like my friend, you're going to go to school, you're going to be the doctor, lawyer, or engineer.
Face your book, Solo. Face your book. Yeah. So yeah, my parents are super, super traditional. But in weird ways, right? Like I think my mom and my dad were very accepting of American life. Right. So I think there was a lot of different aspects to it. But, in terms of their deep cultural values that I kind of keep, not kind of, but I still keep to this day, they were very big on school. So like I actually played college football at the division level in the Ivy League. So it's not necessarily as competitive of a league as some of the bigger Power 5 conferences. But I actually was a pretty highly recruited football player out of high school. Had the opportunity to go to those major conferences and play and really did want to, quite honestly, between, having, the opportunity to play in front of 20, 30, 40,000 people on a weekly basis. Like that's hard to turn down, right? Like, especially if, as you're a young kid and you fall into that and it's your dream and things like that. So, I had those opportunities, but I made the choice to go to Penn and study at Wharton, inspired by my parents. They came, emigrated here, 30, 40 years ago at this point in pursuit of a better life and education. And they read about schools like Wharton in books or Harvard or Yale and things like that. And so that's kind of what inspired me to make that decision, despite wanting to, potentially play professional football. And a lot of my friends actually ended up going and doing that, which helped me in the Calaxy perspective and having the, ties to the entertainment industry. And definitely felt that was a life that could have been mine. In some ways and shape or form, just based off of how, hard I was willing to work and, the recruitment process that I had. But ultimately I made that decision just knowing that, it was a 40-year decision, not a 4-year decision to be able to do what I'm doing now. I'm really blessed to have had that. So like from the very, onset of my upbringing, it's always been important to focus on school and studies and things like that.
Man, that's why you're so smart about all this crypto and blockchain and so forth. I pick your brain about. Now, take me through the transition because I know you did the sports. Well, let me ask this: what was the first job that you had before we transitioned into like how you got into where you're at today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that going back to the knowing how to hustle, right? Like you had to. I think that was a job within itself, being a connector between like American life and like West African household. Like how do that within itself was a job, just having to be able to connect both sides and make both sides happy. But in all seriousness, towards a actual, kind of my first jobs really, I had an internship. I worked at MasterCard, and that was a job in their corporate finance division, something very similar and akin to like, I worked at I went to school at Wharton. So a lot of people end up going to work in finance, which I ended up doing in a subsequent internship and then actually after graduation. But also people work in, corporations and in their finance departments and stuff. And it was a great job. Like it was kind of the first, major, job that I had. Thankfully my parents let me focus really deeply on school and ultimately football, like in high school. So I didn't have to, work in that way. Like now, don't get me wrong. Like when it snowed or when the grass needed to be mowed, I definitely got the wake up call at 5 a.m. With a shovel in my mom's hand. And had that in my bed thrown to me a couple times to do that because that's kind of how that culture
I had the same thing. My friend, wake up! You're not going to sleep through the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Go do your
my friend. Exactly. So I definitely got that, but in terms of like my first jobs outside of that, I worked at MasterCard, and that was great. And I think what's very important in terms of like your career development is trying things that you like, but also trying things you don't like, right? Like I realized that, I wanted something that was a little bit more macro. I didn't want to focus purely on, MasterCard, this company, have this be 100% what I focus on in terms of finance. I wanted to apply that to, financial markets and be able to bring companies to, to market and help them raise capital formation, trading, and things like that seemed a lot more appealing to me. So after that, I was able to pivot into, financial services. So that was my first job.
Yeah. And then that's when you made that pivot. And I love how you brought out a couple of examples of not just sticking with the things that you know, but, figuring out the things that you don't like as well, which really probably enhanced your career once you made this pivot. Now let's talk about the pivot. So you pivoted where?
Yeah, so I ended up working at Citigroup in investment banking. I actually started out in trading, so I did the trading analyst program, and then ultimately, asked one or two many questions about the origination process and how those companies actually start, raising capital. And they were like, you know what, like, why don't we just punt you over to investment banking since you want to be a banker so bad? So I did end up working in investment banking, and I left my job, quite recently to start working on Calaxy full time, which has been a blessing within itself. A lot of founders don't ever really have, sometimes they never have the pleasure and the privilege to be able to quit their, everyday job to be able to focus on their dream. The fact that I've had so many believers, both financially as well as just, mentors in my network to believe in me, to give me the courage to do that. I've been super, blessed and definitely count my blessings there. But yeah, so I pivoted into that, and it was great. Wall Street is a different beast within itself, especially for people that look like us, I will say. But I think it taught me how to hustle, and it taught me how to work hard, and it taught me how to, obviously just have, quite honestly, exceedingly high standard for myself in a way that, like, I made, commonplace a regular. Like, I didn't expect it to ever be easy, and I never expect anything to be easy. And I think having that sort of temperament, really made me, gave me a lot of advantages when it came to becoming a founder and ultimately in my later life.
Yeah, I think having that diversity really helped you out with becoming a co-founder. Now, tell me about this new company that you're a co-founder of, and the story, the origin story of how this got started.
Yeah, so I think, going back to being a connector and things like that, I've been very fortunate to have great pieces to work with. So I would never say it's, ultimately on the back of myself, but like much of what I've done in general in my life and all my successes have been community based, right? So like whether it's my family, my upbringing, my support system has been great. But I also have great friends, and they're also doing great, incredible things. And so for Calaxy in particular, I kind of took what, my Wall Street knowledge and background and applied it to real life, right? The entertainment industry and things that made sense to me. So Spencer Dinwiddie plays on the Brooklyn Nets currently, up for a new contract. So we'll see where he lands next. He's a good family friend of ours and my brother's best friend. And so we actually, took the Wall Street knowledge that I had and applied it to his NBA contract. And he became the first NBA player to securitize his contract. I was a securitization investment banker. That's what I focused on at Citi. So we kind of took that technology and applied it to blockchain and brought it, to market. I mean, that was kind of the impetus of what Calaxy is. Calaxy is a lot more things than that now. Ultimately doing a lot more of that sort of capital formation type stuff will be later on in the product roadmap, but that's kind of how we started. But ultimately we realized that like that as a product fit is something that, quite makes sense a lot. We had a lot of interest in terms of other players wanting to do something similar and how we could help them do that. But, in terms of how you get the masses to understand that, that's a little bit tougher, right? Like securitization and taking contracts and turning them into investment vehicles is something that's hard to explain in 30 seconds to somebody who's never seen it. So
yeah,
we're a little bit
about
early.
To ask you, I was like, look, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Securitizing the contract. Break that down.
Where's the money going?
What is
right?
that? And why would one want to do that?
Exactly. And so we realized that and stuff. And, we obviously have great answers to that, but we realized that, what we also understand very well is social media, right? Like we understand influence and how important it is in community building and brand building. So we wanted to enable creators that we know, because we are them in a lot of sense, like we're tied to it. We're a very authentic product. And so we wanted to use like Web 2.0 or like traditional social media features and build it into a one comprehensive toolkit for an influencer to be able to create their own platform. So like if you want to be able to interact with your fans in a very easy manner, Calaxy is aimed and designed to be the, one-stop shop for a creator to be able to monetize themselves. And so whether you want to do FaceTime calls or video calls like we're doing right now directly, within the app, provide exclusive content, sell merchandise, sell NFTs and crypto stuff. That's why we've built it on blockchain to be able to enable for that future and be that gateway product from the old generation to the new. But we realized that that was something that's going to be a lot easier to sell, and people are going to understand experiences and things like that versus, intellectual property or contractual value, and democratizing that. And so that's kind of how we got there in a roundabout way. Ultimately, we want to be able to, pivot into a world where like Tiana Taylor can take her music royalties and securitize them in the way that Spencer did with his contract, right? But how do you get there? You build something like a Calaxy where it's social media based, market share, and something that makes sense for, everyday people to kind of get out there. And then once you have the people in the ecosystem, you can then, the onus is on us to educate them to the powers of what the future of monetization could look like.
There's so much to unpack in there. So wait, so if I'm getting your explanation correctly, are we decentralizing contracts? Is that in essence kind of?
So the contracts aspect of it is something that like I mentioned, it's admittedly in the future, right? Like it's a little bit tougher. Like how do you get Tiana Taylor to pick up the phone from somebody? Hey, I want to do this with the music library, or how do you get LeBron James to want to do this stuff, right? Like that we're far enough to the point where like there's so much education that needs to be had on that side for that to not be something that you see just on repeat. So like ultimately we envision a world where that is the case. But our path to getting there is, having a platform like Calaxy as currently structured, which is a social media platform.
Okay.
So that's just the precursor, right? Like we're a social media platform. If you're in Spencer Dinwiddie's DMs and you want to FaceTime him and you're willing to pay him, $200 to do so, he should be able to have an easy avenue to do that. And it currently doesn't exist, right? Like if you're in LeBron's DMs, you're not probably going to see them. He's not going to want to give you his number, and it's probably not worth his time. Right. But we wanted to create a platform that made it really easy for influencers to interact with their fans to be able to monetize that community. But going back to the contracts part of it, really what you're doing is essentially democratizing his contract and using it as a technology. And it's a very easy way to take illiquid assets and make them liquid. Right. So like you took his contract. So why would Spencer want to do this, right? To the question that you had before. And it's like, if he wanted to get his money, say he signed a $40 million deal for 4 years and got paid $10 million a year for, simplicity's sake. Yeah. Instead of waiting 4 years to get that $40 millionth dollar, he could take, money in time zero or right now and take 35 million of it today, right? Or, 36 million of it today or 32 million, whatever, the market is willing to advance on that sort of thing. He's able to efficiently raise capital. And the reason why he might do that is because if he could borrow money at 2%, and somebody like Spencer who's quite savvy and has made some great investments in his portfolio, if you borrow at 2% and go make 20%, 50% on that money, you'll do that all day, right? And so the reason why we've done that is you're able to essentially create instant liquidity off of something that has publicly verifiable cash flows.
Wow, it's almost like in essence you're creating your own bank off of future income.
Exactly.
It's almost like the same idea of how you could use life insurance policies to borrow.
2,000% exact same thing, right? And it's an efficient way to raise capital because there are rappers, there are entertainers, different people who will go get a hard money loan to finance a certain lifestyle, right? But if you're sitting on a bunch of intellectual property, or in this case, an NBA contract, you shouldn't have to go do that. Why would you finance yourself at 30% interest when you could do it in a much more efficient way, something like this, right? And so that's kind of the idea of, on the contract side. But again, that's something that we'll get to eventually in the future once you start to educate people on the power of.
Interesting. I love it. And I love the whole aspect of the social media aspect of having a direct to the consumer approach to engage with your customer base. That hasn't been done before. You would think like a Instagram or Twitter or Clubhouse or somebody would try to create that experience already.
For sure.
I'm surprised that it took us this long to really think about that. I mean, kudos to you for putting something like this together. So I have to get your take on this. So when you look at, what's your take on decentralized banking and where it's at currently in the world? Give me your take on that, because I feel like your platform is going to follow whatever we do in that space with decentralization, cryptocurrency, and all that.
I mean, I think in general, like, obviously there's a lot of stuff, and I actually had, been on TV to discuss this a couple weeks ago about the idea of, how different governments or different parts of the world are approaching cryptocurrency and technology and blockchain technology largely, varies. Like, I think, the path to a decentralized world isn't a point in time thing, right? Like it's not going to happen tomorrow, right? Like it's going to be something that happens over time. And I think just the relinquishment of that control that, governing bodies have currently is going to be something that people are going to be, mindful of, and they're going to be sensitive of how we kind of take power away from them and disperse it amongst the community. So I think from that perspective, that's something that's going to be, time related, right? Like it's going to be something that takes time. And then in terms of how it impacts Calaxy and things like that, I think, Spencer actually, fought with the NBA. Like the NBA tried to sue him or did sue him, when he tried to securitize his contract or when he did. And the reason why is because people are trying to get used to and understand, like when you start empowering individuals, like how do you do that in a way that's like responsible and, in a way that makes sense, right? So I think, that time aspect of it is going to be very important. But, to the point of Calaxy or, what Spencer is doing and stuff like that, after having done that and people understanding it and seeing it as it's not something crazy, this actually makes sense, you start to get people more comfortable with it, right? So the NBA, that battle had been fought, right? And I think, Spencer took a lot of bullets in that way in order to be able to help people get comfortable with that. And so I think in general, once you start seeing a lot more uses of the technology that makes sense, we as a world will become useful, comfortable with it, right? Like, because the world makes sense, right? Like, if you think about it, like, it shouldn't make sense that, like, if you wanted to go buy a car, you need to go to the bank to get a down payment for the car. And if the bank's closed, that you can't get the money out. Like, that's just, if the bank's closed, we've just grown accustomed to living in a society where the bank's closed, that's it, right? But there's technology out there that it doesn't matter if there's a bank or not, right? Like, you'd be able to send that money and transfer that value very easily and increase the liquidity that there is in the world. And so, like, people are okay with it currently as it is because their grandma was okay with it. Their grandma's grandma was okay with it. We've grown accustomed to living a life like this, right? But once people become understanding of the fact that there are technologies that can avoid that, we'll see more of it be embraced, I think, personally. And so what we aim to do is bring that to the entertainment industry and help people understand how it can impact, community building or brand building as an individual, and how you can create more authentic experiences that are a lot more secure, they're quicker, and a lot more complex in the granularity of what you're able to offer.
Yeah, and I think I love this idea of using the entertainment industry to do it. I think because people are so glued to entertainment, and for better or worse, that's some people's education, right? Into these other platforms as far as crypto and so forth. I remember having a good education lesson doing business over in Africa where it was hard for me to give payment to individuals that I was working with over there through the banking system. And it was easier, believe it or not, to do it through crypto or some other type of technology.
Absolutely.
Platform to give payment where, they wouldn't lose half of their money, or I wouldn't have to pay all these fees to pay them and then the delay. And it's crazy to think that the banks have not figured that portion out yet. Like, I was like, why does it take so many things for me just to get somebody paid over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has financial incentive too, and like, even thinking about countries in the world where you can't necessarily always trust the banking system. That's very important. That's why you've seen a lot of those countries. Like Nigeria is like one of the largest traders of crypto, right? And it probably makes sense, right? Like if you think about it, right? Like in the U.S., it's kind of weird, but like if you don't, I think a lot of the reason why people are kind of, not reluctant, but just trying to understand what crypto is and blockchain technology as a whole, has to do with the fact that there's not one person to go to deem this credit worthy or to deem it as something that makes sense, right? Like we've grown accustomed, especially in the developed world, to trust entities to be able to point at this person and be like, I trust you, so this technology makes sense. But like that's the whole antithesis of what blockchain's about, right? Obviously. And I think because of that, like that's a lot tougher. But like in a world where you don't trust the people around you always, right? Like in the undeveloped world, that becomes a lot easier of a narrative to accept and understand, right? Like if you can trust, Apple's, the Googles, these big, entities in the world, the government, right? Like you can trust these people. Like you grew up and living in a life like that. You're always built off that endorsement model, or like that ability of like the worthiness or the trust factor that I have associated with any sort of thing can be verifiable by one person. Like you need that sort of thing. So like that thinking within itself, I think it's part of the growing process that we're going through, is kind of unlearning that in some ways, especially in the developed world.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm up here thinking about what I've been seeing in the news lately with China's clampdown, and how Beijing is like targeting big tech.
Mm-hmm.
Does that slow down the advancement of things like what you're trying to do? Or because I see it as, big tech companies are, before that, especially in those areas, they'll be more adventurous and take risk. But if the government's doing these clampdowns, then they might dial it back some, right? Like, all right,
Yeah.
until I figure out, I don't want to be the first to take all the risk and hit all the bullets like your boy has done. Like, let me see
Yeah,
what these
exactly.
regulations look like and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah, I would say on that point too, like, I mean, in crypto specifically, obviously there's a lot of, people are looking for market clarity on what happens with regulation for that asset in particular, right? Like the clamping down on mining and things like that to try and find a way to have more control. Because again, like I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in that part of the world, the government exudes a lot of control, right? And I think the relinquishing of that control is going to be something that just takes time. And so I think from that perspective, that's, one thing. And then also in just general on the traditional, legacy equity markets perspective of it is, a lot of what China has to do with it, the regulation that we've seen, it's not new. Like they've always been controlling. They've always been very vocal about how they felt about running their government. And I think in general, that problem has been exacerbated by the fact that, cross-border data protection has been super important. When you have these super big internet companies in China that are looking to raise capital offshore just to get around, certain disclosures and certain different standards that they are supposed to to meet in their own country, that's going to be something that's going to, bring a lot of attention, right? And so what you've seen recently is a lot of the thwarting of that, because, obviously if you're going to raise capital elsewhere, you have to, share information and abide by the guidelines that exist in that jurisdiction, right? And I think China is really, sensitive about what's being shared and how it's being shared. So again, going back to that whole point of like, how do you enable these powerful countries or these powerful companies or individuals or whatever you want to call it, from a government perspective, how do you start transferring that power and increasing their ability to do the things that they want? And so I think that's what you're seeing a lot of is, they want to have control in the way that happens, over time. So I think that's what's really, been top of mind for them.
Yeah. Now I see your theme is it takes time. So curious, how much time do you think? Do you think there's something we can do in the next 2 to 3 years, 5 to 10? Like,
I think it's tough to say. But I think, just from what we can see, we're pretty deep in the space. I would say in the next couple of years, you'll have a lot more certainty on where people stand from it. And things like Calaxy will help, help people understand the advantages of, what technology could look like and things like that. So I would say, in the next couple of years, you're gonna see. I think by next bull run, there will be a lot more clarity on it. Like if you think about, crypto cycles in general, crypto tends to, have 3-year bull bear sort of, cycles, right? Where you see a expanding of growth and then, a correction. And I think that's kind of what we've been following and seeing. And I think, the commentary from this bull run to the last one in like 2017, I think there's a lot more information or I'd say a lot more clarity in terms of why we're seeing the advantages of this. I think there's a lot more understanding of it. Not entirely, because I do think the market's obviously super volatile, and I think that's based off of momentum buyers, people that don't actually understand the whole idea of like why it's almost crazy that you can't go to the bank, or like why you have to go to the bank to send this money, right? Like all the stuff you talked about earlier and stuff. Like I don't think those people that are buying and selling right now, have fully grasped that a little bit more. Because you've also seen things like NFTs and stuff like that become really in vogue. So that helps people believe in the technology. But I think over time, the difference between this next, this bull run versus the next one that we'll see in the future, I think there will be even more of that. And so over time, I think the volatility of the asset class will start to subside too. So I would say probably in the next couple of years.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it first. Solo says in the next 2 years. And he's an expert on this. So if I don't see my return in the next 2 years, I'm calling Solo. I'm just kidding.
I will say I am not a financial advisor. Do not take this as financial advice. Anybody that's asking, do your research. I can just provide my own perspective. But all seriousness. That's kind of what I would say.
Yeah. No, I'll just pull your leg. Me and you can talk business all day. So let me take a quick pivot because I want to give more information to our listeners who are probably inspired by your story and the things that you're doing and get more, contextual about the steps that you've you took to kind of get here. Now, looking at it from my lens, it probably wasn't the traditional journey to COO entrepreneurship, but give me your steps as far as how you think the steps necessary. Like, give me the steps of how you got into this space and career, and then give me the steps of what you would give as advice to somebody to get into this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was super helpful for me is I became an expert in something, and an expert loosely is defined, right? Like, there's a lot of different levels to it because I have the utmost respect for all the coworkers and mentors that I've had, and there are people that know far more than me in even my space, right? But I think, I needed at least a certain amount of a prowess or some sort of, intellectual capacity or, just some sort of experience level to be able to take, my idea and apply it to something that makes sense, right? Like, you have to have an understanding of it, enough to be able to do that. And so I think for me personally, I ended up being able to do that through, having, the connections to then ultimately, the understanding and then ultimately applying it to, what was, Spencer's contract securitization. Like, I think that was like super helpful as a proof of concept point. But then, what's more is kind of like, do you have all the pieces, right? Like, do you have the pieces to have a fundamental support system? Do you have people around you who have done it before? Do you have the right coworkers? Do you have the right sort of setup? Is the idea of raising capital something that you do think or won't be able to do? And, having a timeline for when you might be able to do that is super important. In many ways fell into it because I think I had a lot of those questions, right? Like, of like, how does this business grow? How does it continue to have a reason to exist? And like, where are those answers coming from? So like, how are you going to get creators to your platform? Well, Spencer and I are young. I have a lot of friends that made it to the NFL. He's in the NBA. We know a bunch of influencers. Like, acquisition's easy, right? Do you know that you have an easy way to get to a product market fit, at least on one side of this, right? Like, do you understand what creators want? How do you get this information and stuff? And again, we were able to have the answers to that stuff, and I was able to have the answers to that stuff just based off of who I am. And then lastly, like, do you have the right connections to build a team of people around you that could help you get towards the end goal? And, the answer was ultimately yes. Have great teammates, super excited. Have a fantastic designer, Chad. Have a great CTO in Cooper and his CSO, Rusty, and like, we have such a great team. So I think that's kind of how I fell into it. And then my advice would really be, become an expert in something, right? Expert, like I said, is relative, but become an expert in something. Make sure that you surround yourself with people who are, more than capable to do what it is and answer those questions that you might have as an initial founder. And lastly, it's a job that never, ever stops. So like, make sure you're fully aware and ready to take that risk and really indulge into that lifestyle. Right? Like, I don't ever stop thinking about this. I will never stop thinking about this. And it's something that you really have to be comfortable with, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not like you have a job anymore. It's not like you show up, do your work, and go home. It's like your job follows you because it's part of your identity in some way when you become a founder. And I think that's something I didn't even know going into it. So I think that's kind of where I would say my biggest piece of advice would be.
I love it. I love it. One thing you had talked about towards the beginning is that proof of concept phase. How important is that proof of concept phase, and how did you really build out the proof of concept, or how would you tell somebody to really build out their proof of concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Like, I think when it came to, securitization and things like that, like, is that something a viable thing? Like, in any sort of finance business, it's always nice to know, like, is there a market for what it is that you're trying to do? So, like, figuring out that was super important. But, I mean, in general, I think it looks different for a lot of different industries and things like that. I think just being able to kind of, understand what is the fundamental problem you're trying to solve. Like, that's like kind of the key. And so like, a proof of concept is kind of getting a sense for, whether actually solving X issue or trying to, act on what you think might be the answer to that solution, or just getting into a very high level of confidence based off of the different stakeholders that are impacted by XYZ problem, right? Like, so like, if you want to create a new, business that is related to social media, like, is there a need for a product like this? Like, is it currently being met by the market? Is it met just not efficient? Is it not met at all, et cetera? So I think from that perspective, proof of concept is very relative. And I think it just depends on the business and things like that. Luckily for us, it was pretty black and white in that, like, if you're talking about an origination business, like, is there two sides to that market, right? But not everything is simple as that. But I think that's kind of what I would say there.
Yeah. I believe you have done a very good job at proof of concept. So much so that you got 7.5 million through investment grants. How how did you do it?
I mean,
there's somebody who's in
it's
the
a
tech
team
space.
effort. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's a team effort because raising money, no matter what, is tough. I mean, I think, it was a matter of, just all team, all hands on deck sort of thing. Like, Spencer and myself, the rest of my team, we touch a lot of different, ecosystems and stuff like that. Like, I don't have a blockchain background. Like, I learned it by the fact that, like, my co-founder, Spencer, is a blockchain guy. Like, he didn't have a finance background and things like that. And, my CSO worked at, in VC for a while, so he has a lot of connections there. And my CTO worked at Hedera, which is is the chain that we're building on top of. And, obviously the people that he knows there will probably look at a project like this and invest, et cetera. And so, we were able to touch so many different demographics. So it 100% was a team effort. But, more importantly than anything, we had a very strong answer for why you should pick us, right? Outside of the tech, outside of the product, why should you pick us as individuals and why now? Right. And I think that was like the most important thing in terms of how we were able to raise all that capital, is that ultimately people were willing to bet on us as being leaders of the creator economy and the revolution that is going to happen in the social media space. Like, when we move to decentralized world, and like when we move to, a world where you have peer-to-peer interactions and build something that makes sense, people believed into that proof of concept. They believed into the fact that they believed in those answers about the fact that I'm going to be able to bring XYZ person to our platform, right? Like, I have the connections to the talent. I am, because of who I am, they're going to be more receptive to that, even if they do or don't know me. And then also just being able to understand that on the other side of it, I'm an avid user of social media. Like, I understand this. Like, I'm not, an older, dude from Silicon Valley that thinks this is a great idea for Zeke Elliott on the Cowboys. Like, I know Zeke Elliott. Like, right? Like, that's my boy. Like, we grew up together and things like that. And so being able to kind of do that and use that stuff to your advantage is kind of a narrative that people like to see, and can get behind.
Yeah. What was harder, getting that first person to invest or getting that 7.5?
I would say the first investor is always the toughest one. But then the problem becomes, okay, well, I want to come in, but you're closing. Like, can you let me in? Like, then that becomes a different problem within itself, because you definitely want to take strategic and money when you can, because they will helpful. But in all seriousness, I think the first buyer is probably the toughest. But, also our platform too is like, it touches so many different types of people. Like, we've had creators invest in our platform, right? Like, this was also a big educational opportunity for them to learn more about crypto and come on this journey with us. And so, like, we were really lucky. Like, we had a lot of different influencers themselves invest in the platform, because I think that narrative was just super genuine to them. Like, this is a product for them, by them. And what's more is, Black culture in general, and people that look like Spencer and I, like, drive culture, right? You think about Clubhouse and stuff like that. Like, Black people were on Clubhouse last year. Like, like, Black people were on Clubhouse for a while, and they made that stuff really cool and popping. But like, unfortunately, Black people aren't going to be the ones getting rich off that, right? Like, you know what I mean? Or like, or reaping the benefits of that rather. So like, we wanted to create something that we knew, helped create, touch creators, but also like our people, right? Because like, at the end of the day, like, we drive culture in a lot of different ways, and so we wanted to be able to affect that.
Yeah, me and my friend were having that same conversation when Clubhouse became popular. I was like, "Look at this! This is like," and then we used to describe it before it was popular. Like, what would you call it? I don't know. It's like the new Black Twitter. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I think from that perspective, we were just, wanted to make sure that we were able to have good answers to a lot of these questions, and I think that's kind of what helped us raise that money, and we hope to raise a lot more in the future too.
Yeah, and I believe you will. I almost feel like sometimes you with your pitch deck, you're doing two pitches, especially if it's two creators. You're teaching, you're doing one pitch to teach about blockchain and how it works, and the next pitch tell them why it's important for you and why
exactly
it's good for you.
Exactly.
So thanks for educating the masses. You have a very for somebody so young, I feel like you've had a very rich and full life already with everything you've done. What's one good lesson life has taught you?
I would say you have to be adaptable. Like, you have to learn how to get, in and out of situations. And, whether I had a little bit of a leg up having to grow up in a double life, like living the one that I had, I think that's kind of the biggest key in stuff, being able to be able to be malleable and know when to push, when not to, and kind of figuring out ways to connect people. Because I think that's ultimately what happens, right? Like, everything that related to Calaxy just happens to be the fact that there's a lot of great things just coming together at the same time or at the right time. I think just being able to have creators and then having the Wall Street background to have the expertise and then understanding blockchain and understanding, what people want because you're in that demographic. Like, I think that kind of just being able to be a connector of those things is super important. And so I'd say that's kind of the biggest life lesson I learned is that. And then I guess like as a 1A and 1B is I would say just having the grit, like you just need to have an unrelenting passion to get to where you want to go, right? Like, because ultimately to have what other people don't have, you have to do what other people are unwilling to, right? And I think that's kind of what, a lot of people, like kind of grasp with is like a lot of founders I found in a lot of the conversations I've had with the mentors that I've had very successful careers. Those are the things that they always let me know. Like, you need to be adaptable. You need to be able to connect people. And then you also need to have that, passion and that fire to get after whatever you want.
Nice. So let's look 5 to 10 years from now. Calaxy is successful. What does the future look like for Black creators?
I mean, I think in the world I envision and what we envision here at Calaxy is we believe that we want to be the standard for monetization. We want to be viewed as the vanguard for the guys who created the, personal creator economy. I envision a world where creators, Black creators, people like LeBron James are publicly listed entities themselves, not IPO in that initial public offering sense. I'm talking about IPO as an initial person offering. How do you get there? And the way that you get there is creating digital communities that are built on blockchain, right? Like you have coins or tokens that are associated with XYZ people, and you get people comfortable using that to transact for things that they're familiar with, which is the video calls, the FaceTimes, the video messages, etc. Right? Like you get people used to the technology and you kind of walk them down the process. But ultimately that token should be listed on a Coinbase one day, right? And like that's how you kind of democratize someone else. And then it's far past sports. It's any type of creator, right? Mm-hmm. If you have YouTube libraries and stuff and you want to be able to monetize that in a more efficient manner, this is something that you should be able to do. I envision a world where like if you own a bunch of your own tokens, you should be able to, or own any tokens rather, you should be able to take loans against it, right? Like, because that should have some publicly verifiable value to it, right? Like, and just the idea of being able to, represent value as associated with someone's likeness is kind of the world that I envision, right? Like, ultimately, like, at the end of the day, I think I would boil it down to the fact that if you have, 25 million followers on Instagram, and you aren't making any money, if you, and it's not even, about the money that you're making off of just you being who you are as a person of note, but that 25 million followers, like, is worth something. Like, your likeness and image is worth something. How do you get to a value where you can start to extract the capital against that, right? And that's kind of where I see, 10 years down the line is like, how do you take that intangible asset and make it tangible?
You're going to mess around, create a whole new market. I don't know, a digital Wall Street. I don't know what.
That's where we're going. That's where we're going.
I was like, man, they about to disrupt the game.
It's interesting. Like, I mean, we've seen it though. Like, Akon did it back where I'm from. He created his own cryptocurrency. And so it's not anything that's new, but I think we just have a very untraditional approach to it. We're using things that people know. You're using people's emotions in the way, and you're helping fulfill that need, right? Like, they want to know this person. They want to interact with this person. Well, here's this technology. Here's a new fun way to use it, right? Versus like, hey, use this technology for what it is, right? Like, our whole idea is that at the end of the day, like, all the biggest companies, the most successful companies, never made you like have to, like, all their products are used without a manual, right? Like your MacBook Pro that you could be, having this call on right now, or anything like that, or a Tesla that you drive. Like, you don't know how it works. It just works. It's supremely capable. It's amazing, but it's the experience that you have associated with it is frictionless, right? And so that's how you get people to understand crypto and blockchain and move into that universe. And you have to make it something that they're willing to accept. Right? And so, like, I can create digital currencies and have people start using them if it's the means to getting something that they're looking for, which is that video call or that video message or buying their NFTs and things like that. And so that's kind of, from our perspective, how we've aimed to change the game. So I think because of that, you can then introduce them to those opportunities I'm saying later down the line of being the standard of personal monetization.
Love it, love it, love it, love it. Man, this has been a very insightful and impactful conversation. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I try to keep my podcast in what used to be drive times. I don't know what we call it now. So let's end it off like this. What advice would you give to people who are still, on the fence about crypto or dipping their toe into this world to help them get comfortable with it? And then what projects are you currently working on, and where can people find you?
So I'd say from my perspective, the biggest piece of advice I would say is do your own research. Don't rely on the research of anyone else, good or bad, really solely, right? Don't take my word for it, because I'm only one person. And quite honestly, like, you just have to continue to remain, just like with any sort of financial market or anything like that, you have to remain agnostic to a certain degree. Like, obviously I'm really bullish crypto and I believe in technology, but if someone came to me with some new information that changed the way that I viewed the entire asset class, please come and tell me, right? Like, if you could tell me that crypto, because again, like, a lot of my assets are moved to crypto, right, at this point in time. So, like, I would love to know why or why not I shouldn't be there. So if that information changed the way that I thought about the asset class, please bring it to me. And anybody else should be like that too. Like, I always talk to Spencer about this. Like, if someone came to us and said that, like, crypto doesn't make sense for X, Y, and Z reason, like, please tell me. I'm not going to not want to listen to that just because I'm a rational investor. You should look at things from the merits of its own investment and nothing else, right? And so I think from that perspective, that's kind of what I would say is do your research, because right now we're experiencing, quite honestly, what could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? The internet came and things like that, right? This is one of those things where, like, you just need to, now's the time to do the research and, decide whether you want to participate in it early or not, right? Because at the end of the day, like, the biggest, capital appreciation or that asymmetric yield comes from being early to an investment like that. So, like, now's the time to get smart on it, understand it, and pick, either way, yes or no, based off of that research. And then in terms of projects I'm working on, obviously, Calaxy is, my baby as well. And we work on that every single day in, day out, and stuff. And updates on that are available, quite honestly, on all different social media platforms via Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it. But yeah, and then me personally, I'm on all those platforms as well. At solo.ceesay on Instagram, solo.ceesay. I'm on Twitter at Solo Ceesay, no dot in the middle as well. And you can find me there, LinkedIn, everything, to join us for the journey. But it's definitely been super exciting.
Yes, definitely been super exciting. And don't worry, if you were driving, you didn't get to take notes, write that down. I'm going to put that into the show notes so you can connect with Solo and hopefully connect with his platform, reach out. I'm pretty sure he'll get back to you and give you more info. Solo, this has been quite the treat. I'm so appreciative of you coming and dropping knowledge here on Risepreneurs. And I can't wait to see what the future has in stores. I must say though, you a little more advanced to me when you say like, I'm one of those investors where I still got a little in stocks and I got a little bit in crypto. I'm kind of like, all right, I don't know how much I want to go just yet. Maybe I have to have some more conversations with you to get more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just at the end of the day, like, yeah, exactly. It's just at the end of the day, you have to keep a rational mind. And as an investor, you can't get too married to a trade and you can't get too down on a trade. So always just keep a fresh mind. But obviously, I appreciate, being on the show. It's been great.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is it. Another edition of Risepreneurs. I can't wait for the fans to get this one. And thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Rise Urban Nation.
Thank you for taking the journey.
Be sure to like, comment, and smash that subscribe button. And stay connected with Terrell on and off the show. Follow at Rise Urban Nation on all platforms.
Do what you love what you do. Don't chase the money. Let the money chase you.